The Capitol erupted when Jasmine Crockett exposed the secret trail of the $17 million Inauguration Fund. Money for the people turned into champagne and offshore accounts. It wasn't debate. It was war. And the nation saw who blinked first. Was this the day Melania Trump was finally brought to her knees? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing chamber shook under the weight of history. This was no ordinary session. It was a nationally televised hearing on the $17 million Trump Inauguration Fund. Every network carried it live. Every eye in America locked onto the Capitol. The air itself seemed to burn as anticipation mounted. Then the doors burst open. Melania Trump entered like a queen, stepping into her court lights, exploding in white-hot flashes. She didn't wait for questions. With a razor smile, she spat her contempt. Oh, just another performance from people who will never understand what real power truly is. The insult landed hard, a deliberate wound. Gasps erupted, reporters scribbled. Millions at home stiffened in shock. Across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, silent but unyielding. Her gaze cut sharper than steel, fixed directly on Melania. Then, calm yet merciless, Jasmine struck. The fireworks exploded in brilliance. But today, the burning question is not who wore the most dazzling gown it is. Where did the $17 million go? The chairman's gavel cracked once against the desk, the sound echoing like a warning shot. The signal was clear. The floor belonged to Jasmine, the entire nation, millions watching from living rooms. Bars and office screens braced for the next strike. She did not rush, did not raise her voice. Instead, with a measured calm that carried more force than shouting, Jasmine opened her laptop. The screen glowed, and with a keystroke, the image appeared on the towering monitor behind her. It was not a stack of complex spreadsheets, not an avalanche of unreadable charts. It was one invoice, simple, undeniable in bold black numbers. The cost of the inauguration venue, we $175,000 per day. The chamber gasped. Senators exchanged sharp looks. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. Camera flashes lit up like lightning. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, her tone, even each syllable, dropping like a hammer. Madame Melania, the original price for this venue was $35,000. Who approved an amount 5 times higher? The question was not just a demand. It was a blade slicing through the marble air, cutting away the glamour of pageantry. Viewers at home felt the chill. In a nation where families scraped together every dollar, this figure was not just math. It was an insult. For a moment, Melania sat still, then her lips curved into a cold smile. She tilted her head, her eyes glinting like ice under the glare of the cameras. When she spoke, her words dripped venom. Do you think you know anything about standards of luxury? Someone like you has probably never even stepped into a 5-star hotel. The line slashed at Jasmine personally, cutting not just her argument, but her background, her class, her very worth. Gasps broke out across the chamber. Some senators shifted uncomfortably, others smirked. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the insult verbatim, knowing it would dominate headlines within the hour. Millions at home recoiled, some in fury, others in disbelief. It was the kind of sneer only the untouchable dared to utter. Jasmine did not blink. She let the words hang poisonous in the air. She refused to give Melania the satisfaction of a retort. Instead, with a tap, the screen changed again. What appeared next froze the chamber harder than the first invoice. It was a dinner menu from the inaugural celebration. Embossed in gold, every letter designed to scream wealth. At the bottom glared the wine selection bottles, priced at $50,000 each. The figure screamed across the screen, the camera zooming in so viewers across America could see it in sharp detail. Jasmine's voice was calm, but the weight behind it was crushing. This is the price of a single bottle of wine, $50,000. This is also the yearly salary of an American worker. Who made that decision? The words detonated. The chamber erupted in noise gasps, murmurs of senators swearing under his breath, aides whispering furiously. Reporters nearly leapt from their seats. Social media feeds exploded in real-time hashtags beginning to trend before Jasmine even lowered her hand. The contrast was savage. One sip of luxury versus a year of back-breaking labor. Melania's composure wavered. She shifted her smile, faltering her fingers, tapping against the polished table in agitation. Her attorney bolted upright voice, sharp, frantic. Objection. These numbers are taken out of context. Irrelevant, misleading. He tried to drown the room in legal jargon. A wall of noise to shield his client, but the chamber would not bend. The chairman's gavel thundered 3 times, each strike louder than the last. The sound silenced the chaos. His voice rang firm, unshaken. The congresswoman will continue. The evidence stands. The attorney sat defeated, his face pale, his hands trembling with frustration. The camera cut to Melania, her jaw tight, eyes hard, a mask of control cracking at the edges. For the first time, the Queen looked cornered. Jasmine did not press the advantage with gloating. She let the silence speak. Let the number 50,000 burn itself into the minds of every viewer. Then she turned slow and deliberate away from Melania and into the lens of the live broadcast. Her eyes locked with millions of unseen faces. Her voice low, solemn, deadly, precise. These are not just numbers. This is the sweat and blood of the American people, blown away in fireworks. Under the crushing silence that followed Jasmine's devastating line about fireworks and wasted millions, the chairman adjusted his glasses and gave a small nod. The signal was unmistakable. It was time to move forward. The doors at the side of the chamber opened and footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Every camera turned, every head swiveled. A man in a gray suit, clutching a folder close to his chest, made his way slowly toward the witness stand. He looked nervous, shoulders tense, but there was determination in the way he kept walking. This was Daniel Whitmore, the former chief financial officer of the Trump Inaugural Committee. His name had been whispered in the press for months, but this was the first time America saw his face. Whitmore raised his right hand, swore the oath, and settled into the chair. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened his folder, but when he spoke, his voice was firm enough to carry across the chamber. Every major invoice carried one signature before it was approved. The initials were always the same, MK. That meant Melania Trump agreed. The words dropped like a bomb. Reporters froze their pens. Was hovering in midair. Senators sat upright, startled. Viewers at home stared at their screens, jaws slack. The chamber buzzed with disbelief. A direct link had been drawn. Not speculation, not rumor. Clear initials, clear approval. Jasmine moved without hesitation. She stepped forward, holding a sheet of paper high before placing it gently onto the projector. The enlarged image filled the monitor, an internal email, plain and damning. The subject line read, "Invoice confirmation," and at the bottom, in crisp black text, it said, "Mrs. T approves." The camera zoomed in, broadcasting every pixel of the phrase to millions of Americans. The silence was suffocating. Jasmine didn't need to say more. The email spoke for itself. Didn't need to say more. The email spoke for itself. Across the table, Melania leaned back in her chair. Her lips curled into a smirk that looked more like armor than amusement. She let out a short, sharp laugh, the sound slicing the tense air. A failed employee, fired for incompetence, now crawling back to steal 15 minutes of fame. How pathetic! Her words dripped with venom, meant not only to discredit Whitmore, but to humiliate him before the entire nation. The insult echoed, bouncing off the marble walls designed to wound. Some senators looked down at their papers uneasy, while others glanced at Whitmore with sympathy. Daniel Whitmore did not look up. His hands shook, but he kept his eyes on the folder in front of him. Jasmine, however, did not allow the insult to linger unchecked. She straightened her gaze, locked firmly on Melania. Her reply was soft but sharp, every syllable ringing with the certainty of a blade. "Madam, the truth does not need fame. It only needs to be right." The line cut through the chamber, silencing whispers, anchoring the moment. Viewers at home felt it resonate like a verdict. It was not about careers, grudges, or ambition. It was about facts. The camera swung instantly to Melania's face. For the first time that day, the smirk faltered. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes flickered sideways, and the smile she tried to hold collapsed into something strained brittle. The image was projected live across America. Melania Trump, who had entered like a queen, now caught in a close-up that showed her mass cracking. The chamber felt the shift. Reporters scribbled in frenzy. Senators murmured under their breath. And millions of Americans, watching at home, leaned forward, sensing the momentum turning. The scene had become more than testimony. It was theater. It was battle. It was a fight over the very idea of truth. One man's trembling words and one woman's calm precision had cornered a figure who thought herself untouchable. And with every camera rolling, the nation was watching the mass slip in real time. The silence after the witness testimony still hung over the chamber, heavy and tense. Jasmine seized the moment and moved to the easel, waiting at the side. With one swift motion, she ripped away the cover, and the chamber gasped. It wasn't stacks of spreadsheets or dense legal jargon. It was one large, bright board anyone could understand. 4 boxes in bold black letters, linked by thick red lines. Jasmine lifted her pointer and tapped the first box at the top. "This is the Trump Inauguration Fund of 2017, she said clearly, her voice cutting across the marble walls. This is where the donations landed. Every dollar given by citizens and corporations who believed they were funding a historic celebration began here. She slid the pointer down to the second box. From there, the money was moved into the accounts of the Trump International Hotel. It was labeled as event cost, but the figures far exceeded any reasonable expense. These transfers happened immediately after the money was raised. She let the words sink in before moving on. The pointer touched the third box. Next, the money went into a company called Vantage Bridge Holdings. On paper, it looks like a business, but in reality, it has no employees, no offices, just a mailbox and a registration number. That is what is called a shell company, created for one purpose: to move money without leaving fingerprints. The audience stirred reporters, scribbling furiously, cameras flashing. The board made it plain. There was no technical jargon, no complexity, just a straight line that even the most casual observer could grasp. Finally, Jasmine tapped the last box at the bottom, and then the funds ended up in the Bank of Cyprus, not in dollars but in euros held offshore, far from the eyes of American regulators. She stepped back and gestured at the entire board. This is the path the people's money took, from donations meant for a national ceremony, through the hotel, through a fake company, and finally into an account overseas. Her words landed like iron, heavy and undeniable. To make it even plainer, she flipped the board to reveal a second panel. On it was one clean example, printed in bold type. A transfer of $4,200,000 left the inaugural fund. Within 48 hours, that money appeared in the Trump Hotel event. The next day, it was sent to Vantage Bridge Holdings. On the following morning, it was sitting quietly in Cyprus, in a European bank account under a different name. At the bottom of the document, a familiar notation appeared in black ink. Mounted beneath it, another internal message, short and clear. "Mrs. T approves." The chamber erupted in whispers. The timeline was written in plain English with dates anyone could read. January 19th, January 21st, January 22nd, January 23rd. 4 days, 4 steps, millions of dollars gone. No one needed a degree in finance to understand it. The red lines told the story better than 1,000 accountants ever could. Jasmine faced the microphone again, her expression steady, her words low and deliberate. The people's money went all the way around the world, only to end up back in your family's pocket. The silence that followed was deeper than any shout. Reporters' pens stopped. Viewers at home leaned forward. Senators shifted uneasily, realizing the scale of what was unfolding before them. Melania tilted her head, the smile returning like armor. Her voice carried the practiced elegance of someone used to crushing others with words. "Congresswoman Crockett, you think a second-rate lawyer from Texas can understand international finance? That is funny." The insult dripped like poison, designed not only to dismiss the evidence, but to mock the woman presenting it. Gas and murmurs rose in the chamber. Some senators smirked, others frowned in disapproval. But Jasmine did not blink. She raised the pointer once more, and tapped each box slowly as if teaching a child to read. "I do not need to be an expert," she said firmly. "I only need to ask one question. Why does the trail of money always end with you? The words echoed in the marble chamber. The board glowed under the lights, the red lines bold and merciless. Melania's smile wavered, the muscles in her jaw tightening. For the first time, the camera caught hesitation in her eyes. The room went utterly still. The arrows were no longer just lines on a board. They were a verdict. With the money trail still burning on the board, Jasmine reached for her final move. The one piece of proof no spin could smother. She opened a slim red folder, slid out a printed email, and held it high until every camera locked on the page. The chamber leaned forward in unison. She slipped the sheet beneath the document camera, and the words burst onto the giant screen in stark black type. A plain header showed the sender, the recipient, the date, and a unique message number. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't theater. It was an email frozen in time. The body of the message filled the center of the screen. 2 short lines that anyone could grasp. Ensure funds routed through hotel accounts. Keep it under celebration costs. Jasmine gave the audience time to read the lines twice before she spoke. Beneath the text, the timestamp was clear. January 23, 2017, 8:14 in the morning Eastern Time. The sender line displayed a private office address tied to Melania's staff, and the signature block carried her name. At the very bottom sat a digital signature tag proving the message had not been altered. To make it more damning, the message number matched the same internal reference already tied to the hotel invoice. Melania shot to her feet, rage, shredding the polished calm she had worn all morning. Fake. This is cheap fabrication, she shouted, her voice breaking like glass. Her attorney scrambled up beside her, waving his arms. Objection. Lack of foundation. Lack of authenticity. This document is a stunt, nothing more. Reporters surge forward, microphones snapping close cameras, zooming in tight on the damning sentence. In the gallery, murmurs built into a low rumble as people realize what those lines meant. This wasn't suggestion. It's what those lines meant. This wasn't suggestion. It was direction, explicit orders to disguise funds as party costs. The chairman's gavel pounded 3 times, echoing like thunder. Order, he barked. The chamber froze. Then from the expert bench, a man in a navy suit stood tall. He adjusted his glasses, introduced himself with calm authority. My name is Dr. Marcus Hale. I am a digital forensic specialist retained by this committee. He looked directly at the senators, his voice steady. This email carries a cryptographic signature bound to the sender certificate. The certificate chain matches records issued to Melania Trump's office. The header shows successful domain authentication checks, and the server route aligns with archive gateway logs. He raised a folder so the cameras could capture it. This validation report lists the certificate's serial number, the signing algorithm, and the verification hash reproduced by 2 independent tools. Every single indicator confirms the same conclusion. Hale's eyes swept the room, and his voice struck like a gavel. This message is authentic. The chamber convulsed. Senators whispered furiously. Reporters fired off headlines and the gallery shook with gasps. Melania gripped the table, fury flashing in her eyes, but the evidence had slipped beyond her reach. Jasmine let the roar subside before she stepped closer to the microphone. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, but every word cut like steel. For those watching at home, here is what matters. She tapped the screen, and 3 green check marks appeared beside 3 simple lines. First, the sender address matches the official office address. Second, the server log aligns exactly with the timestamp you see on this email. Third, the digital signature has been validated twice by independent tools. She paused to let each point land. Then the display shifted to a split screen. The email on one side, the 4-day money trail on the other. Jasmine pointed once, and here this message number matches the internal note that said, Mrs. T approves. Both connect directly to the day the hotel account moved millions out. The room exploded. Senators spoke over each other. The press pen went white with camera flashes, and the gallery surged to its feet before the sergeant-at-arms shouted them down. Even as the gavel pounded, the roar echoed like a storm trapped in marble walls. The cameras cut to Melania. Her jaw was locked tight, her earlier smile gone. her mass cracking under the weight of exposure. Jasmine did not raise her voice, did not ride the chaos. She leaned into the microphone, her words low, deliberate, final. "There is no place left to hide, Mrs. Melania. The truth always finds a light." The chamber had turned into a furnace of tension. Every senator, every reporter, every viewer at home could feel the weight pressing down. For hours, numbers had been dissected, invoices displayed, and witnesses questioned. Yet Jasmine knew the time had come to cut through the noise. She pushed back her chair, stood tall, and stepped toward the microphone. Her voice was low, calm, but each syllable rang like iron. "Mrs. Trump, this is not about millions. It is about honesty. You told Americans this was a celebration for them. Was it, or was it for yourself?" The words sliced through the chamber. Melania, who had sat stiff and cold, let a thin smile slide across her lips. She tilted her chin, as though looking down from a throne. Her reply was soaked in disdain. "The American people adore me. They don't care about the boring details you wave around. They care about grace, beauty, and the history I represent." She smoothed the cuff of her jacket, smiling for the cameras as if a performance could wash away the storm brewing around her. But Jasmine did not blink. She gestured to the staff at the side, and a screen flickered to life. A woman appeared on video, sitting in a modest kitchen with plain white walls. Her voice shook as she introduced herself. She was a mother of 2 from Ohio. Her husband, a veteran who had died 2 years before. She had donated a small sum to the inaugural committee, because she said she wanted her children to feel part of history. Her face hardened as she spoke the next words. "I believed it was for America, but watching now, I feel we were robbed. We gave what little we had, and it went to parties we were never invited to." The chamber fell quiet again, the silence heavy with shame. Jasmine turned back to Melania, her eyes sharp as glass. "How do you look her in the eye and say this was for America?" she asked. The question was plain stripped of jargon impossible to dodge. The cameras caught the flicker in Melania's expression, the brief tightening of her jaw. She recovered quickly, forcing a cold laugh. "You are using soba stories, Miss Crockett. That is what weak lawyers do when they cannot argue facts." The sneer rang out like a whip, but the blow missed its mark. Senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Reporters glanced at each other, eyebrows raised. The insult didn't feel like strength. It felt like cruelty, and Jasmine was ready. She gave a small nod, and a second video loaded onto the screen. This one was grainy, filmed on a phone, but it hit harder than any spreadsheet. The footage showed the ballroom of the Trump International Hotel staff in uniforms preparing tables covered in crystal and silver. On the counter, a waiter carefully set down a bottle of French wine. The label visible price tag, $50,000. A voice off camera, one of the staff whispered, "They told us to bill everything to the celebration fund." The chamber erupted. Gas broke into shouts. Reporters lunged for their phones, calling their editors on the spot. Senators spoke over one another, some demanding answers, others shaking their heads in disbelief. In the public gallery, ordinary citizens raised their voices, some in outrage, others in stunned silence. The chairman's gavel pounded again and again, trying to restore order. "Sit down, order," he barked, but the fury in the room would not die. When quiet finally returned, Jasmine stepped closer to the microphone, her voice steady and calm. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. "This is not about numbers anymore," she said, each word slow and deliberate. "It is about character. The American people can forgive mistakes, but can they forgive lies dressed up as patriotism?" Her eyes locked on Melania, unflinching. "Tell us, Mrs. Trump, was this ever about them, or was it always about you?" The chamber froze. Cameras zoomed in on Melania's face, broadcasting every twitch, every falter to millions of homes. For a moment she tried to answer, lips parting, but no words came. Her eyes darted from the screen to the board, to the faces staring at her. The mask she had worn for years, graceful, untouchable above the fray, began to crack. The smile she forced looked brittle, the kind that shatters under the weight of truth. Reporters scribbled furiously. capturing the collapse in real time. The silence stretched, suffocating louder than any shout. The hearing chamber was no longer just a room of marble and microphones. It had become a courtroom, a stage, and a verdict. Melania Trump, once a figure of elegance and power, now sat cornered, unable to answer the simplest question. Jasmine Crockett had not just exposed numbers, she had struck at the heart of trust, the foundation of public life. And in that instant, every person watching knew the facade had fallen. The silence inside the chamber had barely faded before the outside world exploded. Within minutes, television networks broke into regular programming screens. Flashing red banners, breaking email evidence exposes Melania Trump. Anchors repeated Jasmine's words in stunned voices, replaying the moment Melania sat speechless under the lights. By nightfall, the footage looped endlessly on every major channel, a scene already cemented as historic. On the streets of New York, reporters stopped pedestrians to capture reactions. One man, his gray hair told by the wind, spoke with quiet fury. "We believed them," he said. "We trusted this was about history. Now it feels like we've been turned into a joke." His voice carried the disappointment of millions, and the clip was replayed over and over on the evening news. It became the sound of betrayal America could not ignore in small towns, diners, and cafes, buzzed with conversation as televisions over the counter replayed the footage. Men in work jackets leaned against stools, shaking their heads. Women folded their arms across their chests, whispering to one another about trust squandered. In a Florida retirement home, a group of seniors gathered in the lounge, staring at the television in silence. Finally, one woman broke the stillness. "All that money," she said softly. "And for what?" "We've been made fools of," the room murmured in agreement. Melania tried to push back. Hours later, she appeared on a friendly network, flawless under studio lights, her tone sharp with contempt. She dismissed Jasmine with a wave of her hand and a mocking smile. "A rising politician trying to build her name by smearing another woman," she said. "It is pathetic." The interviewer nodded along, giving her room to speak, but the defense rang hollow. Clips of the interview circulated swiftly. Instead of rallying support, they deepened the divide. Viewers saw not strength, but arrogance. Commentators across the spectrum noted that Melania never denied the content of the email or the timeline shown by Jasmine. She only attacked the messenger. Fact-checkers moved quickly, pointing out the gaps in evasions. By the time the interview ended, newspapers were already preparing headlines that would cut deeper than any televised rebuttal. Outside Trump Tower, a small crowd gathered with hand-painted signs. Some read, "Return the people's money." Others simply said, "Enough." Reporters broadcast live from the sidewalk as the chants grew louder, echoing off the glass walls of the skyscraper. In Washington, citizens drifted toward the Capitol steps, holding candles in the cool night air. A few carried copies of their donation receipts, raising them high as if to say, "We gave and we were deceived." The images spread rapidly, ordinary Americans demanding accountability in the heart of the nation's capital. Editorial boards moved with unusual speed. By the next morning, major newspapers carried headlines that spoke with one voice. Trust shattered read one. Another declared, "From celebration to corruption." Even outlets typically sympathetic to the Trump family struggled to spin the moment. Opinion writers warned that the scandal was more than a political wound. It was a crisis of faith between leaders and the people who believed in them. The clip of Melania sneering at Jasmine replayed alongside testimony and evidence. The trembling voice of Daniel Whitmore. The grainy footage of a $50,000 wine bottle. The quiet pain of the mother from Ohio. Together, they formed a story impossible to ignore. It was not abstract. It was not distant. It was betrayal, woven into every image and every word. Call-in shows lit up across the country. One veteran from Pennsylvania spoke with the bluntness of a man who had given too much already. "We fought for this country," he said, his voice steady with anger. "We believed in its symbols, and now we see them used as cover for theft." She mocks Crockett, but she is mocking all of us. His words aired late at night, struck a chord that rippled into the next day. By then, the tide was clear. Melania's attempt to dismiss Jasmine as insignificant had backfired. The nation was not with her. The more she leaned on arrogance, the more she seemed guilty. Jasmine's calm precision, her refusal to rise to insult, stood in sharp contrast to Melania's sneer. The story was no longer about politics alone. It was about ordinary people who gave what little they had, only to see it wasted on luxury. And as the storm of anger spread from living rooms to city streets, one truth became unavoidable. America was no longer fooled by Melania Trump. The roar outside the chamber had only grown louder with every passing hour. The collapse of Melania's mass, caught in sharp close-ups and replayed across the country, was no longer just scandal. It was the spark for a reckoning. By the next morning, Capitol Hill was swarming with press vans, satellite dishes rising like steel flowers on the lawns. Reporters shouted questions at senators as they hurried through corridors. Each soundbite was hunted, each glance dissected. One senior senator finally stopped long enough to confirm what everyone already suspected. "Yes," he said into the microphones. "There will be a special investigation. The American people deserve nothing less." Inside, a committee clerk moved quickly through the hallways with stacks of folders stamped "Emergency Session." The Speaker's office released a short statement before noon. In light of the evidence revealed, Congress will establish a bipartisan select committee to investigate the handling of the 2017 inauguration funds. The words hit every news ticker at once. Anchors repeated the announcement with urgency while pundits debated the scope of subpoenas and the possibility of criminal referrals. For the first time in years, the machinery of oversight was grinding into motion, and this time it was aimed squarely at the Trump orbit. On the streets, the reaction was louder than any headline. Crowds gathered in front of federal buildings, in state capitals, voices rising in chants that echoed from city to city. In Washington, 1,000 voices carried the same demand: "Bring back our money." The phrase became a chorus, simple and powerful, shouted by men in work boots, women with children on their shoulders, and college students holding handmade signs. Police lines held the edges of the protest, but the mood was not violence. It was anger wrapped in purpose, a collective insistence that what was taken must be returned. News helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting live aerial shots of the growing crowds. On the ground, reporters walked among the demonstrators, capturing raw voices. A retired teacher from Michigan raised her fist and told the camera, "We didn't donate for fireworks and luxury hotels. We donated for history. They stole that from us." Her words echoed through living rooms, filling the silence of dinner tables across the nation. In Los Angeles, a truck driver leaned from his cab, holding a cardboard sign scrolled in marker. "No more lies, no more thieves." The energy was contagious. Cities as far apart as Boston, Chicago, and Dallas all sent up the same cry: "Bring back our money." Television networks responded with the relentlessness of a drumbeat. Every 30 minutes, they replayed the footage that had already etched itself into the public mind. Jasmine Crockett, standing tall, eyes locked on Melania, asking the question that silenced the chamber. Was this ever about them, or was it always about you? The clip ran again and again, sometimes in slow motion, sometimes spliced with the image of Melania's lips parting, but no words coming out. The silence that had followed her collapse became louder with each replay, a void that swallowed every defense she tried to muster afterward. Producers cut montages together, Jasmine pointing at the board of red arrows, the trembling testimony of Daniel Whitmore, the grainy video of the $50,000 wine bottle. Each piece built into a crescendo, and each crescendo ended the same way with the close-up of Melania's face cracking under the spotlight. The repetition was merciless, a hammer striking the same nail until the whole frame shook. Even those who had avoided politics could not escape it. In waiting rooms, airport terminals, and gyms, the footage rolled without pause. Elder statesmen, who had long ago withdrawn from the front lines of politics, began to speak. Their words carried a weight that newer voices could not match. On one evening broadcast, a former Senate Majority Leader leaned toward the camera and said, For the first time in many years, we are watching a new generation tell the truth without flinching. It is rare, it is necessary, and it reminds us what Congress was meant to be. His voice was slow, growly, but his conviction lit up the screen. Another veteran of the House, once a fierce partisan warrior, admitted on air, "I never thought I'd say this, but what Jasmine Crockett did took more courage than we've seen in decades." The comments spread quickly replayed as clips alongside Jasmine's confrontation. Younger viewers clipped them into short videos pairing the gravitas of the older statesman with Jasmine's sharp words. The result felt like a passing of the torch, one generation acknowledging the rise of another. It was no longer just a scandal, it was the birth of a symbol. In Washington, the protests outside the Capitol swelled until the chants rattled through the marble halls. "Bring back our money" rolled in waves, audible even from the committee rooms where staff scrambled to prepare the first subpoenas. The sight was striking ordinary citizens, pressing against barricades, their signs raised high, their voices unbroken. While inside lawmakers debated how wide the investigation should reach, the juxtaposition was clear. The people were demanding answers, and this time Congress. Could not look away. Back on television, the tone had shifted. Anchors spoke not only of evidence and scandal, but of a movement. "What we are witnessing tonight," one said, "isn't just outrage over lost money, it is outrage over broken trust." Another anchor added, "The American people are no longer asking politely. They are demanding accountability in the plainest language possible." The camera cut to live shots of the protests, the chants rising like thunder in the night. And through it all, Jasmine's image replayed like a heartbeat. Her voice, steady and sharp, was set against the roar of the crowd. For millions watching, she was no longer just a congresswoman from Texas. She was the embodiment of their anger, their disappointment, and their demand for truth. Elder statesmen had given their blessing, the people had given their voice, and Congress had no choice but to respond. The scandal had become something larger. It was no longer about a single email, a single fund, or a single figure seated at a table. It was about a country waking up to the cost of lies, and a generation stepping forward to say the words too many had been afraid to speak. The roar in the streets did not fade. It deepened and settled into the bones of the city. By the end of the week, the shock had become structure meetings, memos, subpoenas, and a steady drumbeat of coverage that never blinked. The hearing was no longer a single moment. It was the pivot of a season. The country had watched the mass fall, and now it wanted to see what lay beneath. Inside, Washington power recalculated. Outside, people kept marching, and everywhere the same question chased the same name. Melania felt at first where power always speaks the loudest in silence. Calls that once returned in minutes now took days if they were returned at all. A senior fundraiser glanced at her name on a seating chart and murmured to an aide, "We can't be seen with her right now." Invitations vanished without explanation. The governor's office sent a crisp email. "Given current circumstances, we must revise the guest list." A longtime social ally left a curt voicemail. "Optics, you understand?" Even the polite evasions had an edge. At a private dinner on Embassy Row, a senator known for his iron handshake shook his head when her name came up. "This isn't about friendship," he told the table quietly. "It's about survival." A lobbyist who had built a decade of business on proximity to the Trumps glanced at the door and lowered her voice. "She's radioactive," she said. "Clients want distance." Across town, a public relations firm that once polished every event issued a 1S sentence statement. "We are parting ways, effective immediately. In the corridors where alliances are made." Melania was alone. Behind the scenes, staff peeled away. An aide who had fetched cars and smoothed crises sent a resignation email before sunrise. "Thank you for the opportunity to serve." A scheduler took unused place cards to a shredder. A donor who liked to be photographed at the right shoulder of the right people asked a reporter off the record, "Is this going to stick?" The answer came not in words, but in the way rooms reorganized themselves around the space where Melania used to stand. Isolation was not a rumor now. It was a seating chart. Then came the legal paper. Process servers found their way to sleek lobbies and private elevators. And receptionists learned a new practice phrase counsel will accept on behalf. The Trump Organization announced it would vigorously contest meritless claims. But the headlines wrote themselves new civil suit, filed in New York donor class actions, drafted in 3 state attorneys' general request records. One filing alleged breach of charitable obligations. Another alleged unjust enrichment tied to inflated invoices. A third demanded a constructive trust to claw back funds. The company's statement landed with a dull thud under the weight of stamped case numbers. In a midtown conference room, plaintiff attorneys unrolled timelines across a glass table. "We start with venue costs," one said, pointing at the first line item. "Then we move through the hotel ledger, then the shell, then the wire." A paralegal read from a witness list. Daniel Whitmore at the top, his deposition penciled for the following month. A gray-haired lawyer, old enough to have tried cases with overhead projectors, tapped a printout. "Juries understand a simple path," he said. "Money in, money out. Who approved?" No one in the room had to say the initials. Banks noticed, insurers noticed. A quiet letter from an underwriter asked for clarification on potential exposure. A credit analysis firm placed a division of the company under review. The language was bland and bloodless, but the meaning wasn't risk had moved in, and it was comfortable. A corporate spokesperson tried to steady the narrative with a morning show hit. "We are confident the facts will prevail." But even the host's smile felt thinner than usual. The tide did not argue. It flowed, while the suits piled up a movement, found its name in a church basement 2 blocks from the Capitol. A handful of organizers, some with clipboards, some with laptops, stood under a hand-painted banner that read, "Open Ledgers Now." A retired accountant in a denim jacket took the mic first. "We don't need to fight about politics," she said. "We need to see the receipts." A young veteran followed. "Real-time disclosures, public audits. If you spend our money, we should see where it goes." They wrote 3 demands on a whiteboard post every invoice. "Verify signatures, independent audits every quarter." The room filled with nods. The phrase spread because it was simple. Open ledgers now fit on a sign and into a chant. But it also fit in the quiet moments. Kitchen tables, office Slack channels, PTA meetings. A small nonprofit launched a website that let people upload donations and track who received what, a kind of open accounting built by volunteers. A state university lab offered a free tool to parse filings and flag suspicious spikes. Church groups hosted Know Your Receipts nights. Union halls ran how to read a filing workshops. In a season of anger, this was a plan clean, concrete, and stubborn. And in the middle of it stood Jasmine. Editorial cartoons drew her with a microphone in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Murals went up first in her district, then in cities she'd never visited. Jasmine, staring down a wall of blacked-out lines, the kind that hide truth in leaked documents. A late-night host replayed her line until the audience could recite it from memory. "It is not about money anymore. It is about character." At a community center, she stood before rows of folding chairs and repeated the words people had begun to put on posters. "I am just a voice with a tool." Then she stepped aside and let volunteers explain how to request records. The title the country gave her was not soft. In anchor scripts, in at rallies, it was the same. The voice of ordinary people against dark power. It wasn't a campaign slogan. It was a description that stuck because it felt earned. When a reporter asked her about it, she shrugged. "I'm not leading," she said. "I'm following the receipts." But the image had outgrown humility. In a world where outrage often burned out in a day, she gave it a shape that could hold. Elder statesmen, those same voices who had watched Congress drift into noise, kept speaking up. A former committee chair, his tie loosened and his voice quiet, said on camera, "It has been a long time since people believed these rooms could do anything good. This changed that." Awake, a retired judge, careful with words, added, "The hearing reminded Americans that sunlight is not a slogan. It is a method." Their praise did not feel like flattery. It felt like relief. They were handing over something they had kept too long. You could see the handoff in the polls. On the 6th day after the hearing, a research firm released fresh numbers. "We're seeing a clear rise in trust toward Congress," the pollster told a reporter. "It's not a miracle. It's a move. People point to one thing: the hearing." Another poll framed it differently. The highest share in years believe Congress can be effective when it chooses transparency. It wasn't a wave that washed everything clean. It was a step. And for a country used to watching the needle stuck, a step felt like a leap. Melania's isolation, meanwhile, hardened into habit. She found herself crossing rooms she used to command and spotting faces turn away, and aide offered to bring the car around to a side entrance to avoid unnecessary attention. A gala chair sent regrets. "After careful thought, we believe it's best to postpone." A donor who had once called her a friend sent a note through a lawyer. It contained no sentiment, only terms. Even the friendliest screens looked different now. When a sympathetic host asked, "How are you doing?" it sounded less like concern and more like a test. Inside Trump Organization offices, executives learned to live with the sight of legal pads stacked in towers and counsel on speakerphone. A compliance director ordered a top-to-bottom review of vendor contracts. An outside law firm urged robust preservation of all records. Employees swapped stories and whispers who had been asked for emails, who had been told to stay off personal phones, who had received calendars from 3 years ago, and been told, "Mark, everything you remember." The future wasn't a plan anymore. It was a defense. Lawyers for the company went on television to steady nerves. "We will address each claim and prevail," one said, his smile almost as rigid as his tie. But a city attorney on another channel laid out the path with clinical precision. "We will seek documents, and we will follow the money, and we will ask a judge to hold people to account." She said, "If there is nothing to hide, there is nothing to fear." The split screen told a larger story than either guest could accompany, insisting a government proceeding. In homes where politics had once been background noise, people began to talk about ledger first, as if it were a rule of life. A barber taped a hand-lettered sign to his mirror. "If you can't show it, don't spend it." A city council candidate adopted a pledge post to every expense online within 48 hours. A group of high school seniors invited Jasmine to their Civ class and asked her shy but earnest, "Does transparency get easier?" She smiled at the ceiling light and said no, but it gets normal. They wrote that on the whiteboard and left it there all semester. And still, the cameras replayed the moment that started it, the board, the email, the question that could not be dodged. Networks kept pairing those frames with live shots of court steps and committee doors. It was not gloating, it was building a memory. People forget quickly, and the news forgets faster. But the country was learning in loops. Every replay pressed the groove deeper. Show the trail. Verify the signature. Ask the human question at the end. In quiet moments, Jasmine chose her words carefully. She knew a movement can be broken by ego, as easily as by force. When a supporter called her a hero, she shook her head. Heroes fix everything, she said. "I can't fix anything by myself, but I can help you see." The supporter laughed, half in joy, half in disbelief. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." It felt like a prayer dressed as praise. By month's end, the map of influence had redrawn itself, one small decision at a time. Melania was a guest in rooms that had once been hers. The Trump Organization was a defendant where it had once been a sponsor. Open ledgers now had a calendar, a toolkit, a hotline. And in polling slides and newsroom chatter, a sentence kept returning. Public trust in Congress is rising. Not soaring, not surging, rising. It was the kind of verb you can build on. None of this erased what happened. It did something else. It made a path where there hadn't been one. The isolation, the lawsuits, the movement, the symbol, the polls. They lined up in a row, as clean as the board Jasmine had unveiled. Money had once traveled from celebration to shadow. Now attention was traveling back the other way. From shadow to light. The country had decided to look, and for the first time in a long time, the looking mattered. The uproar that had remade the city settled into a charge hush as the chairman lifted his gavel for the last time. Cameras refocused, pens still, and a corridor of silence opened for a single final voice. What began as a hearing had turned into a national reckoning, and everyone in the room understood it. Papers lay flat screens held still frames, and even the marble seemed to wait for the last word. The committee had the documents, the country had the images. Now it would have the meaning. Jasmine rose. She did not reach for new exhibits or raise her voice. She chose plain speech like a blade. "We have talked about invoices and emails and routes that circle the earth," she said, eyes steady on the panel and beyond them on the nation. "But at the end of a long day, the truth is not complicated." She let the silence grow just enough to hold the moment. Reporters leaned forward with the rest of America pens, hovering without touching paper. The last note had to ring clean. "When leaders spend the public's money," she continued, "they owe the public the full receipt." A flash popped, then another, then none at all. They owe it without excuses, without masks, without a smile that hides the price tag. She drew a breath that carried like a drum beat down the rows. A national celebration is not a cover for private comfort. The point did not need a chart. It needed only a heartbeat and a promise. Then she gave the line that would outlive the day. "Power can buy fireworks, but it cannot buy the truth." The sentence struck the chamber like a bell-sharp resonant, impossible to unhear. The words felt familiar the instant they were spoken, as if the country had been waiting to say them aloud. A senator closed his eyes. A clerk swallowed hard. The cameras caught faces shifting from skepticism to certainty in the space of a breath. The hearing now had its headline carved in stone. Jasmine did not chase applause. She placed a cornerstone. "Financial transparency is the foundation of democracy," she said, each syllable clear enough for a classroom and a courtroom alike. "If you can show the bill, show it. If you cannot, do not spend it." She turned a simple rule into public law without passing a statute. "We can disagree on policy, but we must not disagree on daylight." Even the hum of the air system seemed to fade as the line settled over the room. The lesson sounded like common sense because it was. She looked past the dais to the cameras and spoke to the people who had been at the center of every exhibit. To the worker who gave one shift's pay to the teacher who sent $20 to the retiree, who mailed a check because the day felt historic. "This belongs to you." The words traveled down polished wood and through glass lenses and into living rooms where coffee had gone cold. "You were promised a celebration of your country, not a bill for someone else's luxury." She did not name names or repeat figures. The story was known. You deserved a party you could believe in. The point landed without a raised fist. The chairman cleared his throat, gentled by what he had just heard. "The committee thanks the witness," he said, voice but firm. He spoke the formal words, that close official business, then added a line that sounded older than procedure. "Let the record reflect the importance of what was said here today." The gavel tapped once, not as a blow, but as a seal. The lights above the dais softened. The doors at the rear clicked open to a hallway full of waiting footsteps and waiting questions. Sound surged back like surf. Reporters crowded the exit lenses bright as lightning and microphones raised like a small forest of black metal stems. "Congresswoman Crockett, one question. Do you believe criminal referrals are warranted?" One shouted. "Do you fear retaliation?" Another called. Jasmine lifted a hand in thanks, not in triumph, and kept walking. "We will follow the receipts," she said evenly, the same words she had used for weeks. The rhythm of them calmed the corridor. The closer she came to the steps, the louder the world became. Not as chaos, but as welcome. A roar swelled from the plaza outside, a sound both rough and joyful. Thousands of voices blending into a single human chord. The door swung wide and a bank of late afternoon light washed across the threshold like a tide. Security formed a Security formed a loose lane and then loosened it more, trusting the crowd's purpose. The chant began somewhere low and then rose in waves. "Jasmine! Jasmine!" She stepped out into it, blinking at the sudden brightness, then smiling as if the sun itself were an ally. The plaza was packed, workers still in reflective vests, teachers with canvas tote bags, nurses in scrubs, grandparents in ball caps, students with hand-painted signs. Hands clapped until palms stung, phones lifted and trembled. Tears shone without permission. Jasmine pressed a palm to her chest in thanks and bowed her head once, not as a queen, not as a victor, but as a citizen acknowledging other citizens. The chant grew steadier, a drum beat under the open sky. Jasmine, Jasmine. She moved down the steps slowly, not to savor the moment, but to let it belong to everyone who had made it. At the rope line, a Vietnam veteran raised 2 fingers in a quiet salute. She returned it without words. A woman from Ohio, the same one who had spoken from her kitchen, reached forward with a photo of her children. Jasmine took it gently and promised to send them a letter. A custodian in a work jacket wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and laughed at himself for doing it. A teenage girl shaking said, "I want to do what you do." And Jasmine answered, "You already are." The line between witness and leader blurred until it looked like a crowd. Television helicopters circled their blades, chopping the evening air into a steady thrum. On portable screens, anchors replayed the closing line, and the lesson pairing them with wide shots of the plaza that looked like a living sea. Commentators who had spent years speaking in careful euphemisms used words they had not risked in a decade courage duty daylight. A banner on one channel ran only 2 sentences, one above the other, as if chiseling a monument in real time. Power can buy fireworks, but it cannot buy the truth. Financial transparency is the foundation of democracy. The country rarely agreed so quickly on anything. It agreed on this. Jasmine paused midway down the steps and faced the crowd as if facing a jury that had already delivered its verdict. She did not give a speech. She gave a promise. "We will post the bills," she said, voice carrying over the plaza like a clear bell. "We will show the signatures. We will ask the questions every time, no matter who stands behind the podium." She lifted the photo the Ohio mother had given her and held it toward the lenses. "This belongs to you," she said softly. The chant answered without prompting. Then she turned toward the last stretch of steps and began to descend again, flanked not by bodyguards, but by ordinary citizens who made room for her with shy, protective care. The late sun found the edges of signs and faces, laying a gold border on a day that had been hard and honest. Somewhere in the crowd, a brass band struck a single note and thought better of it. This was not a parade. It was a pledge. When Jasmine reached the bottom, she looked back once at the building behind her. Not in defiance, not in grief, but in recognition. The house had done its work. Inside that house, the sound of the crowd softened into a distant ocean as doors closed and footsteps faded. Staff packed up binders, powered down monitors, and gathered cables into neat loops. A clerk flipped up paper nameplates face down with the care of a ritual. One by one, fluorescent banks dimmed, leaving islands of light that grew smaller each second. The hearing room, so fierce an hour before, exhaled. It was a stage after the curtain falls. Melania remained at the witness table, unmoving in a chair that had felt like a throne when the day began. Shadows reached across the lacquered surface toward her folded hands, as if to claim what the lights were giving up. The cameras that had loved her angles were gone. Only the red exit sign held steady in the corner of the room. A single work light hummed above the witness box. A pale circle that failed to touch her face. She stared at nothing and everything the board that was no longer there. The email that would not leave the words that would not untell themselves. Silence once her ally had turned its back. She reached for her phone and set it down, without unlocking the screen. In the hallway beyond a vacuum cleaner, moaned, and then moved on. The room seemed to grow larger as the light shrank, leaving space where certainty had been. Melania adjusted the cuff of her sleeve out of habit, a small motion that felt like a ritual for a life that had stopped obeying rituals. The door at the rear clicked as a guard checked the latch. She did not turn. In that last spill of dull light, 2 worlds faced away from each other. A bright, roaring plaza where a promise was made, and a dim, abandoned chamber where a performance ended. No judgment needed to be spoken. The day had done the speaking. Outside, a citizen walked into the arms of citizens, and they carried her not on shoulders but on trust. Inside, a single figure sat in a vanishing island of glow. As the room decided it had seen enough, the echo of applause reached even here, thinner now, but still true. Jasmine did not look back again. She stepped into the living city where hands were warm and voices familiar, and work waited. People asked for photos and shook her hand and pressed small notes into her palms about rent and medicine and schools. And she said she would read everyone. It was not a victory lap. It was a beginning, written in ordinary faces. "We will follow the receipts," she told a cameraman who had jogged backward to keep up. Together, the word mattered as much as any number. Above the plaza, the sky turned from gold to blue, to the first honest black of evening. Streetlights clicked on with a shared electric sigh, throwing soft halos over the thousands who would leave in ones and twos, carrying the day home. The steps would empty. The chants would fade. The signs would be saved in closets against the next march. But 2 sentences would remain on every screen and in every kitchen where the news stayed on low. Power can buy fireworks, but it cannot buy the truth. Financial transparency is the foundation of democracy. And as the building settled into quiet and the city kept breathing, the story held its shape, the meaning nailed in place by a final line, the lesson fixed by a simple rule, the ending drawn in 2 images that could not be mistaken. A woman walked out to awaiting people who clapped until their hands hurt and called her name because it felt like calling their own power back. Another woman sat alone in a room that had run out of light, finding no purchase in the darkness she once mistook for safety. The day did not need epilogue or echo. It had earned its period. The cheers outside settled into a steady drum, and the plaza opened like a living stage as Jasmine stepped back to a portable mic. Her face was still lit by the building's glow, but her voice aimed past the stone and straight into the crowd. "Power can buy fireworks, but it cannot buy the truth," she said, letting the line breathe like a promise. Financial transparency is the foundation of democracy. She looked from face to face as if counting witnesses. "If this meant something to you, then the next move is yours." "This is what I need you to do tonight," she said, raising one hand for quiet. "Ask every office that spends your money to post every invoice within 48 hours. She pointed toward the Capitol. "Call your representatives and say, 'Show the receipts.'" She swept the other hand across the crowd. "Join your local Open Ledgers Now chapter, or start one if it doesn't exist." Her voice tightened, urgent but calm. "Volunteer 1 hour a week to help scan, log, and verify. Bring a neighbor. Bring your kid. Tomorrow, go to your school board, city council, and charity, and say the same words." Jasmine continued, crisp and direct. "Keep it polite, keep it public, and do not stop when the cameras turn away." She tapped the mic with 2 fingers. "Film every records request, upload every document, and back it up in 2 places." She nodded toward the reporters on the risers. "Share what you find with 3 people you trust, not 10,000 strangers." Her tone dropped to a low, steady beat. "If they cannot show you the bill, they cannot spend your dollar." Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a